and welcome back. Now we're going to talk about how the Speaker of the House in the United States, Nancy Pelosi, has asked the House Judiciary Committee to draw up the articles of impeachment against President Trump. Now, this was initiated back in September by the Speaker of the House, the actual investigation, and now all the investigations have been going on, and now she's requested the House Judiciary Committee. So we're going to talk about this, about how the process works, with our guest today on our program. We have with us on Skype Mr. Scott Lucas, and we also have with us in our studio Dr. Umar Hayat Abbasi. So I'm going to begin with Mr. Scott Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us on our program today. And I'd like to begin by asking you, we've seen this process begin back in September, where the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, initiated this impeachment process. And now it's actually going quite far along, and now she's asked the House Judiciary Committee to begin the articles of impeachment. So, sir, can you please get into a little bit now? We know that the House Judiciary Committee has a majority of Democrats, so it's likely to pass through this. And then there's a further process of going through the Congress and then at the Senate. So please give us a little bit of your input about this.
Thank you. Well, before we got to this point, the House Intelligence Committee heard from 17 current and former U.S. officials in 2 months of testimony, and they then passed a report to the Judiciary Committee. And the Judiciary Committee, as we heard from House Speaker Pelosi, is going to, on the weight of that evidence, draw up articles of impeachment. One of those articles of impeachment will be bribery, saying that Donald Trump, in effect, offered a bribe to Ukraine, saying you can have military aid, you can have a visit by your president to the White House if you investigate my political rivals, such as the presidential candidate Joe Biden. One of the articles may be obstruction of Congress. That is because Donald Trump told witnesses not to testify. He even told them to defy subpoenas. And one of the articles may go back to the Trump-Russia case, which is obstruction of justice, because of evidence that Donald Trump tried to bury the investigation or to block it on at least 8 occasions. Now, if the House Judiciary Committee adopts the articles of impeachment next week, and it is almost certain it will, because it has a Democratic majority, then we go to the full House of Representatives for a vote on whether to impeach. That's the equivalent of a criminal indictment, Donald Trump, and we may have that vote before Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then after that, the full House is predominantly Democrats, and you need a simple majority over there. So it's likely to pass through the House of Representatives. Am I correct? And then it's going to go to the Senate, and that is where you have a majority of Republicans. There's 45 Democrats and 53 Republicans in the Senate. So in order to get in that case, you're going to need a 2/3 majority. So is it likely that the process there is just going to stop and he'll be acquitted?
Well, most people say, because of those numbers, 53 Republicans versus 47 Democrats, and needing a 2/3 majority, there's no chance that Donald Trump will be convicted, because you have to get 20 Republicans to break away from him. I think, however, there's a slim. It is only slim, but it is not zero chance that you may get some Republicans, whether it's 20 or not, actually voting to convict Trump. Why do I say that? Because amidst the weight of this evidence we have, while the House Republicans have been very much behind Donald Trump, trying to accuse witnesses of being biased and disloyal and saying the process is a sham, only a few of the 53 Republican senators have spoken out firmly behind Trump. Many of them have said no comment, or let's wait for the evidence. They have a political choice. Do they remain tied to Donald Trump because of their own political careers, whatever the evidence is? Or do some of them say the evidence is so great that Donald Trump did abuse his powers of office, that Donald Trump did invite a foreign power to interfere in the U.S. election? I have to stand by the U.S. Constitution and the American system and vote to convict Donald Trump, even if he is a member of my own party.
Right. Okay, sir, so I'd also like to ask you this now. If it does go through the Senate and this process passes through the Senate and President Trump is removed from office, what is going to happen next? in the event that this does go through?
Well, if Donald Trump is convicted, then it's a fairly straightforward process in that the current Vice President, Mike Pence, would become the president for the rest of the first term. But what makes this a bit different, even from when Richard Nixon resigned before he was impeached in 1974, is that we have an election which is less than a year away. So who do the Republicans put forward to try to get the White House for another 4 years? It probably would be Mike Pence, but the Republicans would act very quickly to reorganize their campaign against whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Right. Okay. And this is the third president to be impeached in the United States history. Am I correct? There was President Johnson and there was also President Clinton. And now it's President Trump.
That is correct. So President Johnson survived by one vote and was not convicted in the 1860s. President Clinton easily survived the trial in 1999. But of course, I think the most famous case is the man who actually wasn't impeached, but had he been impeached, would have been convicted, and that's Richard Nixon, who resigned in 1974, just before he was indicted. In other words, impeached. And I think this is probably the closest parallel to what we have now, because in Richard Nixon's case, the charges that he used his office to cover up criminal activity for his own political benefit, in other words, the break-in of the Democratic Party offices, that's the closest thing we have to Donald Trump allegedly carrying out activities to try to bring down his political rivals so that he could get a second term. But here's the addition. Here's what we didn't have with Watergate, why I think this makes it an even greater crisis. This is a president who's being accused of undermining American national security by, first of all, working with Russia, and then secondly, by trying to exact what's called a quid pro quo against Ukraine, saying we will not give you military aid. We will leave you to face the Russians on your own if you don't help me out by, well, basically trying to dig up dirt on my political rival, Joe Biden.
Right. So, sir, what I'd like to ask you then is that suppose he does, in the event that he does get convicted, would he have to face any other courts afterwards for all these charges? Or any other charges against him?
That is an excellent question, because remember that Donald Trump not only faces the questions, the claims out of the Trump-Russia affair and out of the Trump-Ukraine affair, there are multiple prosecutions going on over Donald Trump's business affairs, over his tax affairs, over alleged fraud, over his abuse of his business, his conflicts of interest while he's been president. Robert Mueller, the special counsel who handled the Trump-Russia investigation, he was told by the Justice Department you cannot indict a sitting president. You cannot bring a charge against him. But Robert Mueller told the House committee in an open hearing in May when he testified, on the day that Donald Trump stops being president, he can be indicted on criminal charges. And that is the situation that Donald Trump would face if he is convicted, or indeed if he loses the election in November 2020.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all that clarification, Mr. Scott Lucas. Thank you for joining us on our program. Now, Dr. Umar Hayat,